and welcome to my survey of British literature. I have worked about 28 years on this project and have taught this class many times, and now I'm offering it up for you and your family or your friends. I hope you have fun with this. It's a great class. There are 31 sessions, and I think it will be well worth your while to attend all 31 classes. Each class is 2 hours, about 2 hours each. You can see the Beowulf helmet here. It may be the first thing on your copy of Beowulf. If you have the Frederick Rebsamen Beowulf, as is shown on the book list, then you have this copy and you have this same helmet picture on your book, which is pretty cool. Session 1, this is our first class. Every week, we will be having a devotion from The Imitation of Christ, Thomas à Kempis. The book looks just like the picture, The Imitation of Christ. This has, 130 pages. And every week, excuse me while I write something down. Every week, I'd like another volunteer to read from The Imitation of Christ. This week, our first week, I'm going to read from you a selection. So go ahead and grab your copy of The Imitation of Christ and open up to page 63. So in this book, open up, let's see, where's the picture? There we go. I have to mess with my phone camera. There we go. Open up your Imitation of Christ and open up to page 63. I'm actually reading from page 62. Now remember, think about it. One of you needs to volunteer to read next week. Next week, when you get to this slide, you'll need to pause the video and someone from your group can read a devotion from this book. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long, and they're all awesome. This guy, Thomas à Kempis, is pre-Reformation. Before everybody else thought about, let's get back to the Bible, he was in his Bible. And he was in his Bible so much that as we read these devotions, you will sometimes wonder, is he reading from the Bible? He simply knows the Bible so well that he quotes it without even realizing it. Imitation of Christ, page 62. And it says the 16th chapter, true comfort is to be sought in God alone. Whatever I can desire or imagine for my own comfort, I look for not here, but hereafter. For if I alone should have all the world's comforts and could enjoy all its delights, it is certain that they could not long endure. Therefore, my soul, you cannot enjoy full consolation or perfect delight except in God, the consoler of the poor and the helper of the humble. Wait a little, my soul, wait for the divine promise, and you will have an abundance of all good things in heaven. If you desire these present things too much, you will lose those which are everlasting and heavenly. Use temporal things, but desire eternal things. You cannot be satisfied with any temporal goods because you were not created to enjoy them. Even if you possessed all created things, you could not be happy and blessed, for in God, who created all these things, your whole blessedness and happiness consist, not indeed such happiness as is seen and praised by lovers of the world, but such as that for which the good and faithful servants of Christ wait, and of which the spiritual and pure of heart, whose conversation is in heaven, sometime have a foretaste. Vain and brief is all human consolation, but that which is received inwardly from the truth is blessed and true. The devout man carries his consoler Jesus everywhere with him, and he says to him, "Be with me, Lord Jesus, in every place and at all times. Let this be my consolation, to be willing to forego all human comforting. And if your consolation be wanting to me, lacking to me, let your will and just trial of me be my greatest comfort, for you will not always be angry, nor will you threaten forever. Eventually, sin will be dealt with, and there will not be any more condemnation of sin. There will be judgment, and we will be at peace in Christ." This is one of those devotions that we could spend the next 2 hours just talking about this devotion. It's really amazing when you think about Thomas à Kempis, amazing saint living well before the Reformation. If you see 1380 to 1471, in a few weeks we'll be reading from Chaucer. Chaucer died in the year AD 1400, just before the Reformation also, and that's why we read Chaucer. But do have fun with these devotions. And you may have to stop and talk about it a little bit, and feel free to do that if you want. Feel free to choose your devotion ahead of time. If you're volunteering today to read next week, choose your devotion ahead of time, not based on the length of the devotion, but what makes your heart sing. What I have done in my copy throughout the years with my classes, everyone who reads a devotion in class, I follow along on my page. And if you were reading from page 62, as I did today, then I had you sign your name. And so you can see I have signatures on that page that through the years I have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've had 11 different students choose page 62. And it's okay to choose page 62 again, but feel free. Read it several times, read it out loud. If you volunteer for next week, read it out loud at least twice at home, so that you will read it well when you read it in class next week. And you don't have to read perfect, you just have to be sincere. That's our devotion. And now let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, may we be like Thomas à Kempis. May our every thought be, what can I do for Christ today? What can I do that will please my Heavenly Father? What should I do to become more like Jesus today? Who should I tell about Jesus today? And how should I learn more about God? And thank you for the families represented here who are willing to do the harder thing to earn their British English Lit credit and work hard at home and complete college level material. Lord, bless all of these families and all of these young men and women, all of these students. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. Okay. Thomas à Kempis. He's a pretty cool guy. You can tell he has his own stamp. That must be in Holland, I'm guessing. Thomas à Kempis, born in a small German town, attended a religious school in Holland. He chose a secluded religious life by age 19, and then he lived in a monastery run by his older brother. He remained in some seclusion there until his death. So at age 19, he chose a secluded religious life. He just wanted to be studying the Bible. You know, why would someone choose a religious life at 19? Why wouldn't you go and be a missionary instead? You have to remember his time period, 1380 to 1471. This is before the Reformation. And after the time of Christ, for a while, Christianity was illegal. And the entire Roman Empire was out to get the Christians, get rid of them, kill them, imprison them, make them recant at whatever you had to do to them to make them recount. And later on, when the Roman Empire became Christian, everybody went to church. It was the thing to do. And all of a sudden, church was not filled with people willing to die for their faith. Church was filled with everybody. And many Christians felt that church was unsatisfying and that they were not surrounded by brothers and sisters who lived and died together. They were just surrounded by people who wanted to go to church to show off their new dress or wanted to go there for fun and games. And so much like what we see today in some churches, where people are not there to become disciples, but they're to meet people like a social gathering. And so they would choose this secluded religious life and live by themselves. And very often they did either teach classes to town children, or they would go minister to sick or poor people. They always took a vow of poverty, had very few possessions. And of course, they had no electronics. They had very, very few possessions. And the idea was that they would become more and more like Jesus. And we have no reason to believe that Jesus had many possessions, if any at all. So he remained in seclusion there until his death. For 500 years, this gentle book, filled with the spirit of love of God, has brought understanding and comfort to millions of readers in over 50 languages and provided them with a source of heartfelt personal prayer. These meditations on the life and teachings of Jesus, written in times even more troubled and dangerous than our own, have become second only to the Bible as a guide and inspiration. Isn't that amazing? Second only to the Bible. There are all types of Thomas à Kempis quotes, and there are all types of posters and things with Thomas à Kempis quotes that are just absolutely awesome. If you want to read more about Thomas à Kempis, you can go to CCEL, which stands for the Christian Classics Ethereal Library, and they have lots and lots of Christian classics. This obviously has no, nobody cares if you photocopy it. It has no more royalties or anything like that anymore. And so you can print it, download it, give it away as you like. I like this quote, and I like it because it has rocks in the background, and I happen to love rocks. Gladly we desire to make other men perfect, but we will not amend our own fault. Isn't that the truth? We're always willing to help other people change themselves and become more like Jesus, but very rarely do we want to do that ourselves. He was a Catholic priest. There were few that were not Catholic until after the Reformation. He was a philosopher. He was a theologian. He said, "Be not angry that you cannot make others as you wish them to be, since you cannot make yourself as you wish to be." This is pretty much coming partly anyway out of Romans chapter 7 and 8. I do what I don't want to do, and what I do want to do, I can't, and what I don't want to do, that's what I do. It's a pretty good philosophy, actually, and theology. And so he says, don't be angry. You can't make other people as you wish them to be, because you can't even make yourself what you wish to be. The more humble and obedient to God a man is, the more wise and at peace he will be in all that he does. That's right out of the pages of our book. Eventually you'll come across that. And that is pretty cool. A book has but one voice, but it does not instruct everyone alike. Isn't that true? These are great quotes from Thomas à Kempis. Wherever you go, there you are. And you thought that was from that weird cult movie. I can't think of what it is, where the guy is a rock star and a astrophysicist and a brain surgeon all in one. They quote that in this cultish movie. I can't think of what it's called. But that's a great quote. Wherever you go, there you are. You direct your feet that way, and that's where you're going to go. If you direct your feet toward church, toward good fellowship, then you will have good church and good fellowship. If you direct yourself toward video games or a bar or bad company or bad movie, there you are. You've taken yourself there. Another quote, grant me prudently to avoid him that flatters me, and to endure patiently him that contradicts me. Do volunteer to read. Raise your hand now and let your mom or your facilitator teacher write your name down now. Write it down so that next week you will be asked to read. Jesus always has many who love his heavenly kingdom, but few who bear his cross. Truer words never spoken. Isn't that great? Okay, I pray somebody has volunteered. You've got your name written down. Next week, when you come to the Thomas à Kempis screen, it will be your turn to pause the video, and you can stand up and read the devotion that you have selected. If you read the word want in the 1300s, it means lack. I want of enough food and clothing. It means I lack enough food and clothing. It's all over the King James Version of the Bible, and you will be hearing a lot of older words from, not from Middle English, but descending from Middle English and left over from Middle English, and then words that are around the time of the King James Version of the Bible, which are the same words that Shakespeare will use. So get used to those words and learn them. Look them up. If you look up a word in your devotion, if you read it over twice at home and you realize there's a word and you don't know what it means, look it up. If you look it up in an online dictionary, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the entry for that word, it will usually give you the beginnings of where that word came from. And then it may tell you that that is descended from Middle English or from Greek or from Latin and what it meant in the Middle Ages. So do that little bit of work. Thank you. A book has but one voice, but it does not instruct everyone alike. I see this as a duplicate slide. Wherever you go, there you are. I've always wanted that on a mug or a t-shirt or something. Grant me prudently to avoid him that flatters me, and endure patiently him that contradicts me. Okay, let's get to know one another. If you will pass out your little 3x5, they might be smaller than that, cards, I'd like you to fill a few things out on the card. Put your name at the top, and then say something about your family situation. I'm the oldest of 8. That would be important for your facilitator or teacher to know, because you might get a little bit of grace by that if your teacher knows you are the oldest of 8. Or write, I'm an only child, and you probably have no grace at all this year. Or family, I'm the middle child, anything like that, to just help your teacher to get to know you. Hobbies, for myself, for my family, I have a husband. It's 2022 as I'm making this recording, and my husband and I have been married for 45 years. We have 2 living children. We miscarried a bunch of times, but we have 2 living children, and we have 4 grandchildren now and are hoping for more. My hobbies include reading, and you should be filling out your card right now as you listen. Fill out your card. My hobbies are reading, the Bible, lots of commentary, Bible maps, Bible geography, Bible anything is fascinating to me. And I have hundreds of books because I love Hebrew, I love Greek. Hobby, and I sew a little bit. I sew doll clothes and things like that for my grandchildren, and make blankets for baby dolls and for puppies. Stuffed puppies, things like that. Ministry, my husband and I for 8 years went into McLaren, the prison for boys here in Oregon, and we've done lots of other ministries through the years. We are both 65 now, and so we are not doing as much in ministry. Prayer, I always need prayer that my voice will last for 2 hours, and you fill this in for yourself. These cards, no one else will ever see these cards. Nobody will see these. Your teacher or the parent facilitating this class will collect these cards. They are to be kept secret. They're to be kept given back to you on the last day of class. So your teacher right now can go to her session 31 schedule and make a little note there that says return the get to know one another cards to all the students. You may ask for prayer. I have received all types of prayer requests. Some kids say, I don't know why my mom signed me up for this. I think it's too hard for me. Or I'm dyslexic, or I'm a very slow reader. I don't know how I'll survive. Or my grandma has cancer and I'm trying to spend as much time with her as I can. Whatever your prayer request is, I will pray about it. Your teacher will pray about it. And I'd like the teachers to commit to pray over these cards at least one time between each week when you meet. And then if you need to call on someone for answers and no one in your class is willing to raise their hand and answer a question, you can use these cards, shuffle through them, and use them to randomly select someone and ask them a question. Okay, if you did not stop this, or if you're not done, collect all those cards and we'll proceed with our class this morning. That's really a way to get one another. And your parent or teacher could choose to pause right now and have each person stand up and say, hi, my name is Thelma English. I am 65 years old. I live in Oregon. I am getting close to retirement. I'm now just teaching little classes for my grandchildren, something like that. I'm here because I love British literature. And then have everyone give a little tiny blurb about themselves. You're welcome to pause here and do that. Okay, you have piles of paper in front of you. They may or may not be hole punched. If the facilitator teacher thought to get them hole punched, or if you did it, then you're ready. Open up that notebook, your 3-ring binder, and get your paper into your binder before you lose paper. One time driving home from the first day of class, as I backed out of the driveway at the church that we were using for class and got onto the busy road, I could see 500 pieces of paper just all over the road. And I thought, I wonder who put their syllabus on top of the car and then drove off, and then it fell off on the back. The 3 rings busted open and the paper just went everywhere, and now people are driving over it. So don't do that. Hang on to all of this paper. So your syllabus is pages 1 374 and 400, 430. I apologize that the page numbering, you have a big gap between 374 and 400. That's what used to be the glossary. I've gone through and revised the glossary this year, and it's no longer 26 pages. Now it's 30 pages. And so I either had to scan in again the entire syllabus, and that's close to $100 to have it scanned in. So I chose to just leave it like that. When you take this to the printer and get it printed, he'll charge you for the correct number of pieces of paper, not for the numbers on the pages. His machine will tell him how many pieces of paper. So you've got your syllabus, and you don't have any pages at 375 to 379. They're just missing. They will not show up again this year in any lesson or PowerPoint. You don't need them because they are the old glossary. Now the other thing you have is the glossary. And the glossary is 30 pages long. That's 15 pieces of paper. It's printed front and back also. It's been updated. It's been printed separately. Both are in session 2 at Thelma's library. They may be in session 1. I'm not sure why I said session 2. They should be in session 1. You want to download that, print it up. You need it for class. We do read from the glossary during class. It is rich with all types of information that you need to complete this class. Then you have your 5-page schedule. That's the key to your success. The schedule tells you that there's a quiz next week. The schedule will tell you when take-home exams are taken home and when they are due. The schedule will tell you all of that information, everything that's going to happen in the next 31 weeks and when the holidays are. Then you've got your British Lit syllabus reading sheet, and this kind of matches the schedule, but it's all on one page. It's just the reading. It does not talk about what we do in class or what the writing assignment is or what the optional online sound files are. This is just the reading, syllabus reading. Because some people take this class, they read the books and they skip all the syllabus reading and they don't do very well. So I want your parent to initial this week, after you have read all of the syllabus pages assigned, which are 67 pages this week, a lot of pictures, but 67 pages, you need to have your parent initial number 1, session number 1, that you did the syllabus reading assigned. You lose a letter grade if you don't do all of your syllabus reading. So you're going to get that initial. And then every 8 or 9 weeks, you'll turn that in to a teacher assistant, a TA, or to a parent or the class facilitator, who will record how much of your syllabus reading you did, 100% or 10% or 90%, whatever, and that works into your grade. The roster is your key to communication. If you don't have a roster yet, you should make one now and have someone make a photocopy of it so that you have email addresses and you have phone numbers. Parents can look at addresses and decide, oh my, we could carpool. We live close together, save somebody a lot of time. Please don't ever, ever use a roster for selling insurance or selling products or introducing someone to the product that your dad sells. Don't ever use a roster for any kind of business purpose at all. Those email addresses, those phone numbers, that's all personal information to be used for class. Contacting one another about class matters. The grade sheet. This is a one page that tells you how much value each assignment has so that you know when you're doing a project, how much is that worth toward my quarterly grade? And that way, if you're really into math and you want to have a high GPA and you want to make sure you get an A out of this class or a B out of this class, you can look at that and add up your grades, do the math yourself and figure out your grade before you get a grade if someone is producing a grade for you. If you're doing your own grades at home, your mother will need this so that she can do the math of it. This is what the syllabus looks like. This is a big fat thing. You can see the picture on the left. It has some of my handwritten notes and things on it. All I did was open up my Brit Lit syllabus and take a couple of pictures of it so you can see how fat it is. The picture on the right, excuse me, shows how fat the syllabus is. Lots and lots of paper, and you'll be getting paper almost every week this year. But it starts out with Caedmon's hymn at the top on page 1 of the syllabus. And you've got my handwritten page numbers on many of the pages. And I'm not going to apologize because I scanned this in a long time ago. And every time you scan in a thing this big, it's $100, and I'm just not going to rescan. More paper. On the left here, we have the new glossary. I just redid this in August of 2022. So it is now 30 pages long. It has information that people asked for. I taught this class in 2019, and I had lots of kids say, why wasn't this in the glossary? Why wasn't this in the glossary? And though all of those things, I took notes. All of those things are now in the glossary. Hopefully there are no double entries or spelling mistakes or things that are not in alphabetical order, but that's always possible, and you'll just have to forgive me. And the grading sheet is on the right. I drew some hand lines in there. Those are the 4 quarters represented by those 4 sections, and you can tell that the BD vocabulary, which is due next week, is worth 10% of your quarter grade. Your first quiz next week is worth 5% of this quarter's grade, etc. And that way you can do your own math, figure out your own grade. If your parent needs to do the grades, you don't have to worry, oh no, how will I grade things? That's how you grade things. Wait, there's more. We have the reading checklist. I mentioned this. I divided it with a pin into the quarters, and you might want to do that too, just by hand, so that I can see that there are 8 sessions that have required syllabus reading and what they are. And every time you read your syllabus reading, have your parent just initial it there in the left-hand margin. And that way the teacher, facilitator of the class knows. You need a big binder. The binder I'm using, you can tell by the picture on the right, is 2.5 inches. And I prefer a D-ring. This one is not a D-ring binder. I like the D-ring binders better. They don't tear the paper as much. Now, if you have problems with the paper tearing, the way to get around that is page 1, and then the last page in your binder, in your syllabus. If you run tape, just a big thing of Scotch tape along the left edge of each of those, and then hole punch through that, it will give you a strong first and last page, and it will help to not tear and keep the other pages from tearing as well. Just a tip of after many years of giant number of syllabuses. Okay, you're going to be using Thelma's Library, www.thelmaslibrary.com. You'll be using that all year to download things and to get look at this video if you're not in class and you have to watch it at home. Your username is student with a capital S. Your password is William1066, capital W, lowercase m, 1066, 1066. William the Conqueror conquered Britain in the year AD 1066, and that's why I've chosen William 1066. It's been the same password, I think, for 28 years. Grading. This is that grade sheet. This is just looking at 1/4 of it. You can see what everything is worth. You're going to take home a Beowulf study guide next week. Yes, not till next week. Next week, you'll take home the Beowulf study guide. It's a 2-week project. It's worth 1/4 of your Q1 grade. Your Everyman study guide is also a 2-week project. You'll take it home week 4, and it's due sessions week 6. And that's worth 35% of your Q1 grade. And so you can tell how much each thing is worth. Usually quizzes are not worth as much. It's just to make sure that you get your reading done. Q2, sessions 9 through 16, you'll have your Canterbury Tales study guide, which is a 3-week project, due session 9, that's 30%. It's a big deal. It's a big study guide. It's very important that you read it and that you understand it well. There are lots of study notes in the study guide to help you. Gawain, I should have that word underlined, Gawain quiz and vocabulary session 10. All of that vocabulary is now in the glossary because kids were having a hard time looking up some of the Gawain vocabulary words in regular dictionaries because regular dictionaries don't go back to Middle English. The Much Ado study guide, that's our introduction to Shakespeare. You're going to be writing a sonnet, which is due session 13. And then someone in your class, hopefully, will put them all together and make a sonnet booklet for the entire class. I've done that every time. I'll show you more pictures of those when we get to that point. But that's a lot of fun. You write a sonnet just like Shakespeare. You can even add pictures to it, things like that if you like. We read as you like it. That's what AYLI looks like. We have our take-home exam. It is open book take-home exam because we cover so much time. We can't really have you learn that much and memorize it all and do a regular exam as we did in American Lit. So this is a take-home open book exam, which means it's forced review. We did this type of exam in seminary, take-home open book, because if you didn't remember when it got said in class, you remember it when you look it up again for the exam and have to find the answer again and write it out. Syllabus reading is only 5% for this semester. Q3, your third semester, Paradise Lost, that is the name of a book. That should be underlined because it's a book. But you're writing a Paradise Lost paper. Don't worry about Paradise Lost. Yes, it's a college level read, but yes, there are Thelma read alouds for every single book, chapter, whatever you want to call them, so that you will hear me say, yes, they did just fire a cannon in heaven and things like that. Pilgrim's Progress, an easy read with quizzing. Paradise Lost has quizzing, lots of fun things coming up. Q4, the end of the year, you get to pick a novel of your choice, Charles Dickens or somebody like that. And then we do read a short story for Dickens with a quiz. We read from George MacDonald. He's the guy that inspired C.S. Lewis to write. That was George MacDonald. And Chesterton, we're going to be reading from G.K. Chesterton. And another exam, more quizzes for all the short stories that we read. And that's how we do our grading. If you miss a class, I realize this is a homeschool world and you might be on vacation this very week, session 1 or session 2, because why not go to Disneyland after everyone else goes back to school? And we're A-okay with that. We're jealous, but we're A-okay with that. But if you miss any session, you must make it up. You have to go to Thelma's library online and you have to watch the video and then complete all the assignments, bring a note back to the facilitator, teacher, or parent and say, Mrs. English, only your facilitator isn't Mrs. English, Mrs. Robinson, Mrs. Becker, Sally listened, watched the video for the session she missed and then sign it, and that's good enough. If your parent is really, really busy, you write the note and have them sign it. That's the way it goes in high school. A review of very important things. You miss a class, you miss a quiz, you miss an exam. No late papers, no late quizzes, no late exams, unless your facilitator, teacher, parent decides that that's what they're going to do. If you're sick, I realize the whole COVID thing set us all back a little bit, but in the homeschool world, we don't need to get behind unless we really do have a family emergency. If you get something like chickenpox, then you're going to need a little bit of grace. If you break your leg, you might need a week of grace while you get it all set and get your pain meds out of your system and start school again. Things like that. If you really need some type of grace, that is going to be between your parent and the class facilitator. Grades, we went over grades. Clothing, please come to class dressed comfortably, but don't embarrass anyone. Don't embarrass anybody by, boy or girl, wearing clothes where when you sit down, the person sitting behind you can see the crack in your rear end. I can't believe I have to say things like that now. Girls, please don't wear things where your bra straps show. Just don't do it. Wear comfortable clothes, wear your jeans. That's fine. Do not come to class in your pajamas. Don't wear toddler t-shirts if you're a girl. Little t-shirts that scrunch all up that really would be more appropriate for your little sister. The last thing we need in class is for people to pay attention to clothes that people are wearing rather than paying attention to what we're learning. This is a learning environment. When you go to work someday, it will be the same thing. You are expected to dress in a professional manner. You don't have to be professional, be casual, but please be decent and be kind to others in what you wear. No one should have to be distracted by what you are wearing. Group emails, I highly suggest that your parent or facilitator put together a group email list so that when you send an email to everyone, you can do it with one click and do those as blind courtesy copies. I always use blind courtesy copies so that no one worries about getting spam attacks or anything like that. If you have any seniors, high school seniors in your class, they will also be completing a senior project idea. If you don't have any seniors in your class, you don't need to talk about this again. If you do seniors, you can also go to Thelma's library. You can go to session 30 and 31. There might still be a session 32 up, and there are some senior projects that are loaded up, and you can look at those for a sample of what other people have done. All right, this is session 1, and here we are, half an hour in. Today, this is an introduction to class. We kind of did that, and we're looking at the earliest of British literature. What happened after Rome fell in AD 476? And what on earth is British literature? Literature coming out of Britain. Well, when did Britain start to be Britain? That type of thing. You'll be reading this week, not from a book, but from your syllabus, that massive stack of paper that you put in your 3-ring binder. You'll be reading pages 1 through 67. Yes, that's a lot of reading, but yes, there are also a lot of maths and a lot of pictures. So it's not all printed word. You're going to be reading about Caedmon, brand new to you, Caedmon and the Ruthwell Cross, the Dream of the Rood. That was a style of British literature. People had these dreams and they would wake up and write down the dream that they had. The church historian Bede's account of the monk Cuthbert and the miracles associated with him, the Battle of Malden, men will like that especially, and an introduction to Beowulf. Your Bede vocabulary sheet, you should have that copied already. If you don't have a copy of that, you can print it from session 1. Come prepared next week for a quiz on the syllabus reading. Now there's a lot of syllabus reading and it's unusual syllabus reading. So the value of that quiz is only 5% of your first quarter grades, but it's very important reading. There is a Thelma read aloud up at session 1 that gives an overview explanation. It's only 11 minutes long, just to give you an overview, and you would listen to that 11-minute sound file and then do the reading for yourself. Then you'll kind of know what you're reading. If you want me to read the entire thing to you, it's just under 3 hours, and it is all of pages 1 through 67, and it takes just about 3 hours, which is probably the time it would take you to read it yourself. If you read it with me, please have your syllabus open while you listen to me read it so that you can follow along. Perhaps have a highlighter or a red pen in case I say you should highlight this. This is important, something like that. There also at the website is an OE. That means Old English. Middle English is ME. Old English is OE. There's an Old English read aloud of Brithwold's speech at Malden. You will not understand it at all. But after you've read your syllabus, you'll know what the Battle of Malden is, and you'll know what a brave speech it is that Brithwold, I can't pronounce it, the Brithwold gives. And that would give you a sample of what Old English actually sounded like. Then a couple of the beginning of monasticism. I kind of told you that at the beginning of this class, if you're interested in any of that. And then it tells you at the bottom, next week, bring your Dover book. And then session 2, next week, we'll be talking about the Old English period, and we'll have a quiz on the reading. We'll be listening to a song that a modern songwriter named Marty McCall wrote. He calls it Caedmon's hymn, Christ is Risen. And he kind of gets it from Caedmon, and it's pretty cool. He does a really good job. And they kind of sing it like monks do. There are no there are no instruments in it. It's kind of chanting. If you visited a monastery, which would be well worth it. There is a monastery at Silverton, Oregon, that is definitely worth visiting to hear the monks chanting and watch them walk up and down the hill from Station of the Cross to Station of the Cross in their long brown gowns. And the library is to die for there. While I went to seminary 1999 to 2004, I was able to use their library, and it was, wow, what a library. Okay, and then next week we'll be talking about Tacitus, who graciously recorded the culture of the people who would have been the people of the Beowulf culture and time period. So next week we begin Beowulf. You've got to have Beowulf next week. This week we read from the syllabus. Next week you have to have Beowulf. And if you want me to, I will read all of Beowulf to you. You can tell there's a Thelma sound file now for all of Beowulf. It's a 2-week project, which is pretty cool. Okay, Thanksgiving week, we don't have class. So whatever day your class meets on Thanksgiving, we take the week off. Senior projects, I'm going to leave this for seniors to research later. There is a handout of this in session 1, and you can print that, or perhaps your teacher thought and printed it, but we're not going to spend time talking about something only seniors need to do. No class, basically after the second week of December, the first or second week of December, check your schedule, see what your class schedule is. There's usually a 3 to 4 week break during Christmas so that you can, if you must, you can continue with science and math, subjects that you can't really double up on or work harder for. And if not, then you have a little more time to spend with your family and take care of your grandma and things like that. When you write papers for Mrs. English or for your teacher, your parent, look at syllabus page 429, and this list is there. Give references for quotes. Quote from your book, quote book and line numbers on works like Beowulf that actually have the line numbers. Give the line number. Using EG and IE, E.g. means example. It's a Latin term, example gratis, something like that. For example, and this would be a sample sentence, our children all have M names, in parentheses. For example, Mark, Mitchell, Michael. That's how you use e.g. How do you use in other words? I.e., it's different from e.g. and at high school is the time to learn the difference. Here is a sample using i.e. My children have excellent behavior. In other words, they obey their parents. No contractions anymore. You can set your computer up so that it will search out contractions and squiggle red line underneath those, but no more contractions unless you are writing dialogue. If you are rewriting dialogue, Maria said, don't tell me what to do, then yes, go ahead and add contractions for dialogue. But for all of your formal writing for this class, there will be no more contractions. No slang. So we don't use words like gonna, kids are goats, children are human. Kick the bucket, my 2 cents, cool gig, hot girl, nice wheels. Those are words that might even mean something different 20 years from now. Words that are used as colloquial or slang, hot car, or where we say, oh, that's sick, that's slang. And you can't use that. 20 years from now, it would require a footnote to explain that to your audience. So please, no slang, no colloquial. Use a cover sheet. There's a sample in your syllabus. Grades 11 and 12, please try to give your paper a title. Trying to prepare you here for college or work. Word counts listed in the schedule. For example, if you see 300/400/500, that means 300 words are required for grades 7 and 8. 400 words are required for grades 9 and 10, and 500 words are required for grades 11 and 12. If you are actually in junior high, grades 7 and 8, I would suggest using the word count for grades 9 and 10. If you are going to claim this as a high school credit, you need to complete this as the high school level. If you are grades 7 and 8 and barely able to do it, but doing it because your sister is doing it, or this is the only year you can ever do it, your parent could make a special arrangement with the teacher that you complete. For example, in study guides, you could do all the even numbers or all the odd numbers and have your parent work with you to learn the information of the evens or the odds, something like that. You have my permission and blessing to do that if somebody's really young. If they're going to go home and cry and drop out of class, then, but you want them in, then I suggest you have some type of special arrangement and stick with that. Now, learning how to write numbers 1 to 10, this should be in your grammar book, but you write out numbers to 10 using words. After the number 10, then you use numerals for 11, 12, 13, etc., unless it begins a sentence. And we'll talk more about that next week, because often we have numbers in our writing and there are rules for that. If you don't have a grammar book, get a grammar book. All right, let's talk about what happened after Rome fell and what is British literature? What is it? AD 100 marks the death of the last apostle. That's the Apostle John. It's the beginning of Christian persecution, and it's the end of the apostolic age. The age of the apostles ends. We believe John died AD 99 or AD 100. He was a very old man, and that's the end of the apostolic age. No more apostles. Now we just have the disciples or the apostles of the apostles. So it's the beginning of Christian persecution. There are awesome roads because the Romans, they really know how to build a road. It's not like here in Oregon where we have potholes. Their roads went down 5 feet. With slave labor, you can do quite awesome things for roads. So they had awesome roads, and they had Roman garrisons staged every so many miles, so it was safe to travel. And so when the disciples went out to teach, and their disciples went out to teach and start churches and make disciples, they had these awesome roads to travel, and they had protection from the Roman garrisons for traveling. Absolutely perfect. It's amazing providentially how God set it all up, set the world up and let the Romans conquer the world. That's another class, classical literature, but how he allowed the Romans to conquer the world and build all of those awesome roads and set up this incredible transportation system. And everybody spoke Latin or Greek. Everybody spoke Latin, and that was the language for business. It was amazing how everything was set up absolutely perfect for the apostles of the apostles. By AD 200, the persecution of Christians is continuing. There are many famous paintings of this era. This is probably depicting the Roman Colosseum. If you ever go to Rome and you go in the Colosseum and you say, oh, there weren't that many Christians here, that person that were killed here, that person has not read the history books, because there were hundreds and actually thousands of Christians who were eaten by lions, burned at the stake, all types of horrific things. And again, that's another class, that's classical lit. AD 313, we have Constantine issuing the Edict of Milan, and now the Roman Empire is a Christian empire. You see the key row there. The row looks like a P, that's the Greek sound for R, and the X is the K sound. K, as in Christ. The key row are the first two letters, but they're Greek letters in the Greek word for Christ, and the key row became a symbol of Christianity. So the Roman Empire is now a Christian empire, and pagan temples actually get destroyed, broken down and destroyed. You have a timetable in your syllabus that you can look at that gives many of these items. That's why you're supposed to look through your syllabus this week. Now, AD 325, we have the Council of Nicaea depicted here. It's the first church council. If you don't count Acts 15 as the first church council, Acts 15 was in AD 49/AD 50, and that is the real church council. But in the history books, mostly we call the Council of Nicaea the first official big church council. And they are trying to prevent heresy. So they go around the room and they say, what is Jesus? Is he half man, half God? Is he all God? What is he? And they decided he is all man and all God. And if you don't believe that, you're a heretic, and out with you, you can't teach or preach anymore. This was a big, big deal to try to prevent heresy. They couldn't just print books up for everybody. They could not send out on the radio. They had no podcast. They had to use the teachers and the preachers. And so if you didn't line up with appropriate doctrine, out you go, you're a heretic. By AD 400, Rome is a thoroughly Christian empire, but Rome is failing. Remember, they only have until AD 486. So by AD 400, the empire is failing. Many people say that it rotted within. Syllabus page 8 has a map, the same map that you're looking at here, similar, showing the Roman Empire and how the Visigoths and the Vandals, you thought Vandal was a modern word, but the Visigoths and the Vandals leaving from Africa, Carthage, attacking Rome, and they just couldn't handle it. By AD 476, it's bright red and giant because it's a very important date. If you invite me to your wedding and I come and dance at your wedding, I will ask you, by the way, what's the year of the fall of Rome? And I'll expect you to remember AD 476. That's a key date. And with the fall comes a plunge into the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages is usually described in a textbook chapter as AD 500 to AD 1000 or even AD 1500 before they say we go into the Middle Ages. The Roman roads are still there, but there are no more soldiers to protect those travelers. So it becomes more dangerous. Without safe travel, missionary efforts become laborious. And language changes too, because with the Roman roads, everyone saw and traveled and had commerce all the time, and everybody spoke the same language. As soon as the roads are destroyed and it gets harder to travel, people start changing their language. Just like people who live in Michigan speak a little bit different English than those here in Oregon. And people in New Yorkers, we think they have an accent. As soon as you start separating people, we start talking differently. So the Christian church was established in the British Isles well before AD 300. And so while the world was still pagan, the Christian church was in these British Isles. Celtic Christianity or Celtic Christianity, depending on your teacher, these are the Irish, the Scots, and Wales, as depicted on this map, had its own distinctive customs. And Greek scholarship flourished in Ireland for several centuries after it had died elsewhere in Western Europe. However, in the 5th century, the AD 400s is the 5th century, Britain was invaded by non-Christian Germanic tribes. You have a great map on page 8 in your syllabus. These are the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. You might call them Vikings. They're they're warrior people. The invaders conquered the native Celtic Christians despite resistance by, among others, a leader whose story has come down to us, doubtless with some exaggeration, as that of King Arthur. Supposedly he fought against all of these bad guys, or drove them north and west into Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. From these regions, Celtic Christian missionaries returned to England to preach the gospel to the heathen invaders. Meanwhile, the Bishop of Rome, Gregory the Great, you'll read about him this week in your syllabus, decided to send missionaries from Rome, a group of monks led by their prior Augustine. Now, that's not Augustine of Hippo, the famous Augustine of Hippo from AD 400. This is another Augustine named after that Augustine. Lots of bishops named after that Augustine. Augustine, this is AD 597. So remember, Britain had been evangelized and had lots of Christian converts. Then they were attacked by all of these Viking type people, the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes, and they kind of go back to being part pagan. And then Augustine, the Bishop of Rome, sends missionaries down there again in AD 597. And so what do they find? The missionaries arrived in Kent. That's the southeast corner of England. I've got a red arrow there for you, near Canterbury. I've been to Canterbury Cathedral. It's a cool place to go. And the king, whose wife was a Christian, allowed them to settle and preach. Their preaching was outstandingly successful. The people were hungry for the good news of salvation, and they made thousands of converts in a short time. In 601, the king himself was converted and baptized. Augustine was consecrated bishop and established his headquarters at Canterbury, where there is a cathedral now. From his day to the present, there has been an unbroken succession of archbishops at Canterbury. And you might think, well, how did that Christian girl end up in this pagan place? It was frequently the case. If you got an awesome, pure, wonderful Christian young woman to agree to go and marry some pagan king in a foreign land, as long as the king would allow her to bring her own preacher guy, if they were willing to do that, and then there she was, married off, just like Esther, married off to a pagan, thinking that the Lord's work would be done. Then she would sacrifice her personal life for the sake of salvation for others. In AD 603, Augustine held an unfruitful conference with the leaders of the already existing Christian congregations in Britain. Augustine forced a Roman-style worship on his converts, contrary to Pope Gregory's explicit advice to not do so with a church long accustomed to its own traditions of worship. And this is extraordinary that Pope Gregory had said, don't make them sing like you, play music like you, dress like you, act like you. Don't make them do that. If missionaries had learned that, like Pope Gregory knew, let them have their own culture. If their worship wants to be loud and clangy and bangy with lots of bongo drums, let them do that. And it is too bad that more people didn't follow that. It is said that the British bishops, before going to meet Augustine, consulted a hermit with a reputation for wisdom and holiness, asking him, shall we accept this man as our leader or not? And the hermit replied, if at your meeting he rises to greet you, then accept him. But if he remains seated, then he is arrogant and unfit to lead, and you ought to reject him. Augustine, alas, remained seated. It took another 60 years before the offense was healed. Okay, Old English poetry, which I'm going to be called, you'll see in PowerPoint slides as OE. These PowerPoint slides often are limited in word usage. Old English poetry, prior to the 12th century, AD 1100s, has been calculated that we have about 30,000 lines of Old English poetry, including Caedmon's hymn. Now, this is on your syllabus, page 1. It's in your glossary, page 1. Old English poetry uses a system of alliteration. That's the word in your glossary on page 1, alliteration, and stress. Normally, there are to be 4 stressed syllables in the line or 2 in each of the half couplets. And at least 3 of these syllables should be alliterated, beginning with the same consonant on any vowel or any vowel. What is alliteration? Practically all the religious poetry we possess had been attributed to 1 or 2 of these poets. Excuse me. Caedmon, flourishing, that's what the FL is, flourished or writing his poetry, Caedmon around AD 670, and Cynewulf around 775. Caedmon was a steward in a monastery. Workers entertained one another during meals by singing lyrics on a harp. They sang about battles like the Battle of Malden, you'll read this week. They sang about mystic heroes like Beowulf, and they loved riddles. Caedmon sang songs that were given to him in a dream, amazing the monks and the scholars. His hymn of creation is in your syllabus on page 1. Cynewulf, God the all-ruler, is fate metamorphosed. The powers of evil are identical with those once called giants and elves. The paradise and hell of the Christian are as realistic as the Valhalla and the Niflheim of the heathen ancestor, and weird is going to become providence. The pagans in Britain, they had a word for unusual things, and it became our English word weird, but it is W-Y-R-D in the Old English weird, and that is fate, or we actually think it's kind of weird, but that's where our word came from. In fact, we see that word weird in Macbeth. Caedmon and Cynewulf, here you see on the left, Wiglaf. You can tell Wiglaf's name. You're going to meet him this week, and you cannot probably read Beowulf in the Old English there on the left. But you can listen to some Old English in a sound file in session 1 if you want to. Topics include the heroes of the Old and New Testaments in this poetry, the saints as they live in the legends of the church. The metrical form, with rare exceptions, is the alliterative line, constructed on the same principles as with Beowulf. And weird, the concept of weird in the culture becomes the spirit of providence, that instead of fate, that it is what God deigns will happen, what God decides will happen. It becomes providence. And so the pagans make this switch over from believing in fate to believing in providence. You're not just fated to have bad things happen in your life. Perhaps God allows a bad thing to happen to you. Providence would be our Christian culture today. Christ and his apostles are described like English kings or chiefs, followed as in feudal duty bound by hosts of clansmen. And so when they're telling these early stories, Jesus is like a brave thane. The homage paid to the divine son is the allegiance due to the son of an Anglian king from Anglia, comparable to that paid by Beowulf to his liege lord Hygelac, or to that displayed by Brit Lit at the Battle of Malden. The Christianity of England in the 7th and 8th centuries, that would be the 600s and the 700s AD, was a commingling of two different kinds, Celtic and theological. And we call this syncretism. When you mix together some pagan Celtic stuff, you can even see these bizarre, unusual creatures that aren't in the Bible anywhere, and this artwork. You combine some pagan stuff with some Christian stuff, and we call it syncretism. We're used to dating the introduction of Christianity into England from the mission of St. Augustine in AD 597. And so that's what we call the introduction of Christianity into England. And actually, Christianity was there way before AD 597, but they kind of went back to their pagan days. Don't forget, Western missionaries had been to Britain long before St. Augustine in his 40 months. The existing form and practice of Christianity in Beowulf is the blend of these weird things. It's Celtic and it's theological. That's what we love about Beowulf. It's just weird, cool. The most important of the religious poems at one time attributed to Caedmon are Genesis, Exodus, and Daniel. From the point of view of the historian of literature, Genesis is the most interesting of these. And that means it is a poem about Genesis that someone got in a dream vision, and they wake up and they sing it, and eventually it gets written down. It's a poetical paraphrase of the first of the canonical books in our Old Testament, extending to the story of the sacrifice of Isaac, the willing to sacrifice Isaac by Abraham back in Genesis 22. So these guys had these dream visions. They know their Bible, they have these dream visions, and then they sing it. They sing a song all about Genesis. The poem opens with the praise of the Creator. The poet then proceeds to relate the revolt and fall of the angels, which according to ancient theology necessitated the creation of man to fill that vacant place in heaven. And we would talk about that more in Old Testament survey. And then the creation of the earth in accordance with the opening chapters of the Vulgate Bible. That means Jerome's AD 405 Latin translation from the Hebrew, completed in Bethlehem, which is way cool, but that's Old Testament survey too. At this point, we have a repetition of the first motif, the fall of the angels. Satan, in anger at having fallen from his high estate, avenges himself on God by tempting man, and the rest of the narrative proceeds in accordance with the biblical narrative. The monastery at Whitby, which is cool if you want to look that up on the internet and just look up the monastery at Whitby and look up pictures of the monastery and what they do there now, tourism and all that. It was famous because it was the home of Caedmon, ruled by the abbess Hild in accordance with Celtic, not Roman usage. The influence of Celtic Christianity may be traced in some of the features that most characteristically distinguish Christian from non-Christian poetry. The Celtic monastery was the home of a brotherhood of priests, and the abbot was the father of a family, as well as its ecclesiastical, which means church, superior. The Christian virtues were humility and meekness, and they produced a simple form of Christianity, readily understood by the unlettered people. They don't have much of an education, the people of the North. It's the personal relation of the soul to God the Father, the humanity of Christ, the brotherhood of man, the fellowship of the saints that the Celtic missionaries seem to have preached to their converts. This simple doctrine inspired the best passages of Old English religious poetry. And that's why Old English poetry gets skipped often in school, because it's all religious. Any attempt to describe Old English literature, as shown by the work of Caedmon and Cynewulf, is difficult. And Caedmon stands for a group of singers whose work we feel to be earlier in tone and feeling, though not always in age, than that which we know to be Cynewulf's or can fairly attribute to him. And you'll have this information in your syllabus, page 3. And you also have a picture of the Ruthwell Cross. If you want to look up on the internet about the Ruthwell Cross, it's now enclosed in a church so that it will not deteriorate further. And this cross has the fall of man. It has the sacrifice of Christ. It has all types of things that are done in runes and in pictures up and down the 4 sides. It's an awesome, cool Celtic cross. The Celtic cross usually has a circle type thing around the cross part at the top. And this is the Ruthwell Cross in Ruthwell, England, in the Ruthwell Church. The work of Cynewulf and his school marks an advance upon the writings in the school of Caedmon. Caedmon is at times subjective and personal in tone, but in Cynewulf, the personal note is emphasized and becomes lyrical, like you can sing it. And here is a really good image of the Ruthwell Cross inside the Ruthwell Church, with runes inscribed up and down and set so that people can't actually touch it, but everyone can see it. The runes tell the story of the cross on one side. The pictures simply show the story, because during the time of Caedmon, during this early time, many people were illiterate. After the fall of Rome, once we get past AD 400, into the 500s, the 600s, the 700s, the 800s, the only educated people really are the church people, the bishops and the monks who are preserving the Bible and things like Beowulf and Caedmon. The monks are preserving all of this. They're the educated ones. And so many people only learn through pictures. And so art has a language of its own. People in the Middle Ages knew if they looked at a painting of a young mother, father, and a baby, they knew it was Jesus because he had a little halo around his head, and they knew it was Mary because she had a halo around her head. And I believe Mary is depicted in blue before the birth of Jesus, and after the birth of Jesus, I think her garment goes to red. I could be wrong. You'll have to look it up now. But there are all types of things done in medieval art and on this cross, carved into the cross, that would tell the story in pictures. And then there are simplistic runes. You can see the 4 corners, that unusual type of writing. Those are called runes. And of course, runes are in your glossary. Let's see what a rune is. Go to the R's in your glossary. It says glossary page 392. That's no longer true. So this slide has an incorrect page number. Runes even has a picture in your glossary. Little is known, so I'm reading from your glossary, page 447. Little is known about the origins of the runic alphabet, and you have a picture of all the alphabet there. You have a little chart, which is traditionally known as Futhark, after the first 6 letters. In Old Norse, the word rune means letter, text, or inscription. The word also means mystery or secret. So the runes are mysterious and secret. In Old Germanic languages, and runes had an important, and in runes, there was an important role in ritual and magic. Runes went out of use during the 9th and 10th centuries. That's the 800s and the 900s. According to the Eddas, the poetic saga of the Norse gods, the runic alphabet was a gift from Odin. A selection from the poetic Hamal and the Eddas tells of their discovery, also in this illustration I've printed there. In self-inflicted supplication, Odin hangs for 9 nights upon the world tree. That's that little picture there. That's the world tree. And he's wounded without food or water. Finally, he sees the reflection of the runes in the water and says, "Wounded I hung on a wind-swept gallows for 9 long nights, pierced by a spear, pledged to Odin, offered myself to myself. The wisest know not from whence spring the roots of that ancient rood. They gave me no bread, they gave me no mead. I looked down with a loud cry. I took up runes. From that tree I fell." Does that sound familiar to you? Does that sound like Jesus Christ pierced in the side? And so here, someone has taken something Christian, and we see a syncretism where they have blended an Old Norse pagan story with Christianity. The runes originated, I'm reading from the glossary, around 200 BC. They had already been replaced by the Roman alphabet, which the English received from the early Irish missionaries. The expansion of Christianity and the beginnings of English literature are bound together, for the missionary and the Roman alphabet traveled together. And we owe it to the Christian scribe that the songs and sagas, the laws and the traditions, the faith and the proverbial wisdom of our forefathers were first recorded and preserved. It's hard to imagine before the conversion of the English to Christianity during the 6th and 7th centuries. That's AD 500s and AD 600s. Almost all of the intellectual wealth of the nation was found spoken by the people and was memorized from generation to generation by means of song and recitation. You may easily remember all of the songs you learned in Sunday school because you learned them as songs. These people did not have lots of paper and ink. Vellum was extremely expensive to prepare and was only available for people who had a scribe and who were going to write something important to retain it for history. People didn't just write things down. They memorized it. And by making something into a song, you memorize it forever. You may have even memorized some Bible verses by singing them. I have many, many Bible verses. Of course, they're all King James, because in the 1970s, when I was your age, the King James Bible was the only Bible there was. I think the NIV came out in 72 or something like that. But most of the verses I memorized in King James Version, which now is considered to be really, really old. But many of these things were memorized in song, and that way they could be taught to people. You could even teach proper theology by putting something to words, to music, so that people would not become heretics, thinking that Jesus was half man, half God, or something like that. That would not be theologically correct. Okay, your homework of this week. You are going to read syllabus pages 1 through 67. If you feel confident with your own reading, just listen to the 11-minute introduction that's online in session 1. Or if you want me to read it to you, which might be faster, I'm not sure. It's a little less than 3 hours for me to read through. And I do make comments and a little bit of commentary. Then you have your bead vocabulary definitions. You please use complete sentences. Please explain terms briefly. All of those words are in the glossary now. You're reading Caedmon's hymn. You're reading about the Ruthwell cross. You're going to now you're not going to dream about, you're going to read about the dream of the rood. The rood is the cross. And this is the cross having a dream that Jesus that dies on this cross. And these are the words of the cross itself. It's pretty cool, Old English stuff. You'll be reading about Bede or Beatty, depending on your teacher, the life and miracles of St. Cuthbert. He wrote about St. Cuthbert, and there is lots of hyperbole in Cuthbert. I think a lot of the miracles got a little bit exaggerated. We'll see what you say next week. I think there's quite a bit of exaggeration. I think there were miracles associated with St. Cuthbert, but I think because they were told over and over and over before Bede wrote them down as history, Christian history, I think they got exaggerated a little bit. You tell me next week. Be sure and read that carefully so that you'll get the weird quiz answers correct. You'll be reading about angels and Saxon kings and archaeology and looking at really cool pictures. Next week, I will wear my imitation Saxon gold-plated jewelry. So when you see me next week wearing great big old earrings on each side, you'll know why. And you'll be reading about the Battle of Malden. And we have to say it that way. The Old English audio of that is at the website so that you can listen to what the Old English sounds like. And the Battle of Malden, very heroic. Next week, we will learn what heroic culture is. We live, if you're living in America, we live in what some people call a guilt culture, which means we all know about what the Bible says, what is good and what is bad. It's good to get married before you become intimate. It is good to get married before you have children. It is good to give glory to God. It is bad to steal. It is really bad to murder. We have all of these things that if we don't obey, they're all biblical precepts. And if we don't obey these things that we get from the Bible, then we feel guilty. And many people have worked and worked to try and get this out of our culture so that we will not feel guilty, telling us these things are not bad. Who told you this was bad? And so we're called a guilt culture. Well, the people of Beowulf and the guys, the warriors at the Battle of Malden, they're not a guilt culture. It's called a heroic culture. It's an honor-based culture. Honor is everything. If your enemy is coming in at it'd be high tide or low tide. If they're coming in when the waves are going against them, I guess that would be low tide because they're in real deep water. I don't know. You'll read it in your syllabus. Then you'll wait until the tide changes to give your enemy the advantage because that's more courageous, that's more honorable. Instead of seeing your enemies coming and running home and grabbing your wife and your children and taking them somewhere to safety, in honor cultures, people like the Battle of Malden, they would never do that. They will stand there and they will fight and die. They will never leave their liege lord. If he dies, they'll die with him. If you run away, you are not welcome back home to your village ever. You're a coward. You're gone from the culture. The Vikings often said, you come home with your shield or on your shield. So you went out and you battled with your liege lord, the guy who provides you with a big hall to meet in. Think of things like Lord of the Rings. I will make references Lord of the Rings, and it will say LOTR, the typical abbreviation for Lord of the Rings. Much of what we read in Beowulf, even the Battle of Malden, you can visualize things out of the Lord of the Rings. So you have a great big long hall where all the men get together and their shields and their spears and swords hang on the wall, and they have decorations on the wall. All the things they've captured from their enemies hang on the wall. Sometimes maybe even their enemies hang on the wall. And that's where they get together and tell each other how awesome and brave they are, tell their stories, have a singer, a scop, a bard, a singer come and sing stories about their bravery and all of that. And of course, in Christianity, if your enemies were coming, you are not required to stand there and try and kill your enemies. If Christians were being attacked, you definitely would go to save the young, the old, your women, and go off somewhere and then approach it when you were better better capable of fighting this battle. So it's interesting to see the differences between a Christian culture and then people like Beowulf in the Battle of Malden, who have this very heroic culture. We do have surviving heroic cultures today. One would be Muslim culture. That is an honor culture or a heroic culture. For example, for a Muslim, a real Muslim, the worst thing that could ever happen to you would be to be publicly dishonored. We don't understand it when we read stories about Muslims who have come to America. And then, for example, just this year, there were stories about a man with 2 daughters. This woman married this Egyptian man, and he was Muslim, and they had 2 daughters. Well, the daughters were dating and doing typical teen things, although most homeschoolers, a lot of homeschoolers don't date. I didn't date. But his girls were dating and wearing clothes he didn't approve of. And the girls were quite afraid. And he hit his wife and beat his girls. And he acted like he was wanted to make up to them. And both of the girls, one even told her boyfriend, if I don't come back, my dad killed me. That's what happened. And their dad invited them out for dinner, and they thought he was making up with them. He took them out to dinner somewhere, and then he took them somewhere off-site, and then he killed both of them because they had dishonored him. And the only way for him to regain his honor and the honor of all of his family, even families still living in Egypt, was to either make them obey. And if he couldn't make them obey, then he has to kill them because he's been dishonored. And he can't really stand among men unless he takes care of that. And that's why it's okay in Muslim cultures to kill wives and daughters. If they become a Christian and they don't repent of that and come back to the Muslim faith, your honor requires that you kill them. And we don't understand that because we live in a guilt culture where murder is just wrong. It's just wrong to kill another person. So those are the people of the Battle of Malden, and those are the people of Beowulf. And how do you teach those people about Jesus? Think about it. How do you teach these people that live in an honor culture? How do you teach them about Jesus? Gangs in America or gangs in Mexico are very similar. Those are honor cultures. To be publicly humiliated or dishonored would be the worst thing that could happen to you. And we see that also in Japan. Japan still has an honor culture where if you are embarrassed, for example, if an executive is found to be cheating or taking money from his company, his only way out might be suicide to save the honor of his entire family. So we do still have honor cultures, but it's not a Christian culture. A Christian culture is based on humility, giving to others, taking care of others. And what do you do when these people, how do you tell these people about Jesus when they think humility is a joke, a weakness, when they think kindness is a weakness? How do you tell them about Jesus? Well, you kind of make Jesus kind of a warrior kind who also practices humility. So enjoy your reading this week. It's going to be great. And let's see, you're also reading a very important introduction to Beowulf. It's part of Cliff Notes from this cool lady from the University of Oregon. Cliff Notes are cheap. You should probably go buy a copy of Cliff Notes if you love Beowulf. A Saxon royalty chart, places of interest and some maps, Old English period literature overview. This is all in your syllabus reading this week. And my introduction to Beowulf for English 101 at Golden State School of Theology. There's a college, an online college. I wrote a curriculum for them. Actually, I wrote English 101. I think it's 201. I think it's sophomore level. Sorry. But it's my English literature, that course that they use at Golden State School of Theology online. And so you have my introduction from that on page 54. And then a little brief of Beowulf and some information on the Battle of Hastings. And that's that battle that creates William the Conqueror 1066. That's the Battle of Hastings. That's where we get that date 1066 that you also have to remember forever. And of course, you've got that 11-minute audio, the overview, or the just under 3-hour audio. Do read, listen with a red pen, with a highlighter, all of that, so that you get the most out of these. And I think that's it. Okay, the Lord bless you. I'll see you next week. You still should have some time in class to talk about what you're going to be doing this week and how to get it done best. Okay, Lord bless you.